lesson, we're going to be using multiplicative inverses to solve equations. I'm going to introduce this lesson by a word problem that we'll come back and solve. Talking about caves. Stalactites are icicle-shaped stone formations found on cave ceilings. They form from minerals deposited by dripping water. Suppose a stalactite is 10 inches long and is growing at a rate of about 1/8 inch per decade. How long will it take for the stalactite to reach a length of 1 foot? Now, in order to solve this problem, we will be using the multiplicative inverse. So let's do some practice problems before we actually solve that word problem. Let's make sure we understand what the multiplicative inverse property is. It's the product of a number, and its multiplicative inverse is 1. So if you have 3/5, you multiply it times its inverse, which would be 5/3, that equals 1. A over B times B over A is equal to 1, where A cannot equal 0 and B cannot equal 0. To solve an equation that has a fractional coefficient, you can multiply each side of the equation by the fraction's multiplicative inverse. In this example, where I have the red arrow, 4/7 is called the fractional coefficient. So in order to solve for x, to isolate the variable, you are going to multiply each side by the fraction's multiplicative inverse. So in order to isolate the variable, we're going to multiply each side by its multiplicative inverse. Again, simplify before you multiply. These, of course, cancel each other out. So all I have left is x is equal to -3 times 7 is -21 over 1, or just -21. When you solve an equation with the fractional coefficients, remember to check your solution by substituting the value of the variable in the original equation. So now you can substitute -21 in for x to check your work. Now we're going to introduce an example 2, solving a two-step equation. Notice we have a constant term, which is 4/5, on the same side as our fractional coefficient. So what you will do is move the constant term before you use your multiplicative inverse property. So in this example, you are going to subtract 4/5 from each side. Now 1/3 minus 4/5 we will change that now to 5/15 minus 12/15. If it helps to add the opposite, you can. Again, using the same rules as you do with subtracting integers, they're different signs. So you subtract 12 minus 5 is 7, so it's going to be a -7/15. After we've subtracted 4/5 from each side, in order to subtract 4/5 from each side, we needed to find a common denominator, which I did was 15. Then I showed how you can add the opposite. You get -7/15. Now I have -11/15 over x is equal to -7/15. Now I'll use the multiplicative inverse rule, so I will multiply each side by its inverse. Here I can simplify before I multiply. Now I have negative 7 times negative 1 is positive 7 over 1 times 11 is 11. X is equal to 7 over 11. Now let me go back to the original step when I was subtracting 1/3 from 1/3 minus 4/5. I found a common denominator, the LCD, the least common denominator of 3 and 5, which was 15. 1/3 changed to 5 over 15 minus 4/5 changed to 12 over 15. Okay, so I'll have some practice problems here. I'm going to pause the video. We'll come back and check our answers. Okay, notice in 1, we started off with 5/6m is equal to 20. We multiplied each side by the multiplicative inverse of 5/6. Then we simplified. It was 20 over 1 times 6 over 5. We simplified before we multiplied. 4 times 6 is 24. 24 over 1. Final answer is m is equal to 24. On example 2, we added 20 to each side. So negative 16 plus 20 is 4. So we have 4 is equal to 3/4 n. Then we multiplied each side by the multiplicative inverse of 3/4. So we multiplied the left-hand side now by 4 over 3 times 4 is equal to n, which gave us 16 over 3 is equal to n. Simplified to 5 1/3 equals n. So again, we're moving the constant term first and then multiplying each side by the multiplicative inverse. In 3, we subtracted 1/2 from each side. Then we found a common denominator. So we had negative 2/3 p is equal to 5/6 minus 1/2. Then we had negative 2/3 p is equal to 5/6 minus 3/6 because we needed to find a common denominator to subtract the fractions. 5/6 minus 3/6 is equal to 2/6. So now we have negative 2/3 p is equal to 2/6. Multiply each side by negative 3 over 2. Our final answer would be p is equal to negative 1/2. Okay, in 5, example 5, I'm going to add 4 to each side. So now I have a negative 5 is equal to 2. Multiply each side by negative 5. A is equal to negative 10. In 6, I'm going to have to simplify. I'm going to have to add the opposite, add the opposite. So now I have m over 8 plus negative 15 is equal to negative 12. I'm now going to add 15 to each side to isolate the variable. So now I have left is m over 8 is equal to 3. Multiply each side by 8. M is equal to 24. Now we're going to solve the word problem that we had at the beginning of the lesson. How long it will take how long will it take the stalactite to reach the length of 1 foot? So we started out, remember, we were looking for 10. 10 was in our original problem of 10 inches long. It started out at 10 inches long, and it was growing at a rate of about 1/8 inch per decade. So 10 plus 1/8 a equals 12, because that's how long we're wanting it to reach, which is 12 inches, which is a foot. So again, you're going to use your rules in order to isolate the variable. Multiply it times its multiplicative inverse. A is going to equal to 16. The stalactite will be 1 foot long after 16 decades, which is 160 years. So since the original problem was talking about in decades, we did A was the decades, and since it was already 10 inches, we wanted it to equal to be a foot. So we changed 12, we changed it to 12 inches because that's how long foot is in inches. And again, we used our rules. So 16 decades, because that is what A was, because it was in decades, or 160 years. Let's work on this puzzler. I'm going to pause it and see if you can determine what the answer is to the puzzler problem. So this is a very, excuse me, this is a large division problem. This is 3 divided by 1/2 plus 1/4. It's actually a large fraction. So we found a common denominator of 4. Changed the 1/2 to 2/4. The 1/4 stayed the same. Now we have 3 divided by 3/4. When we are dividing with fractions, we multiply it times its reciprocal, and we come up with the final answer of 4.